Hello and welcome to the second video in the launch series for EdgeRater PRO Unleashed. And in the previous video, the launch event presentation, I talked about the main features of EdgeRater PRO Unleashed, and in particular about one of the trading templates that's available out of a whole host of templates that are included in the system. And we talked about short selling stocks with Connor's RSI. In this video, I want to talk about data. I got a lot of feedback, a lot of questions from the previous video. In the box underneath this video, there were questions typed in. I also received a lot of emails. And so one of the fundamental things of a package like this is data. You can't really do anything without data. You have to get your stock data from somewhere. So this topic is all about where it comes from, where it's stored on your computer, and how EdgeRater Pro uses it. So this video is pretty much going to be just a straightforward demonstration. I'm going to show everything within the program itself. So let's get started. A good place to start exploring about data is in the Security Chart tab, where you'll see a chart of the securities, and on the left-hand side you'll see this symbol list. So EdgeRater Pro really revolves around the idea of symbol lists. So what is a symbol list? Basically, a symbol list is a list of symbols that you can use to fetch data from various data providers. And a list of symbols is really just a text file with that symbol in, and optionally a description of the symbol. So you can see here I've got the S&P 500.txt list selected in this drop-down box. And any lists that you have on your computer in the folder, and I'll show you where that is in a minute, will appear when you hit this drop-down button. They'll appear as a list within the drop-down, and you can change lists, or you change the list that you're working with just by selecting the various lists. So right here I've got the S&P 500 list selected. Now I can tell immediately that this list has data associated with it. Now I said that a list is really just a list of symbols and optionally descriptions. That's exactly what it is. But what will happen is once you configure this list and tell it where it needs to get data from, and you hit the update data button right here, it will go out to the configured data provider, download the required amount of data for that list, and it will store that data as a data snapshot, and that snapshot will be associated with the list. And what you're seeing in this window here is the list of symbols and the to and the time. So what this means is to is what date do you have data up until, and this one is up until 7/31, so July 31st, 2013, and the time that the update was applied. And here we're just looking at end of day data. So this is July 31st, end of day data. Now I had one question that somebody asked, and they said, well, how can I get my updates done? How do I get intraday updates done? Because what happened when they opened the program, this side of the window was squished right down here, and it was impossible to see some of the buttons at the top here. You see what happens if you close this pane down a little bit, then some of the available buttons disappear from the little menu in here, and instead they get applied into this further drop-down menu. So it was a bit hard for that person to see how to do intraday updates and end-of-day updates. So just make sure that you have this pane at a width that is wide enough to suit you. Another little trick here is I'll just expand this up a lot more, and I can actually change the fields that are shown. So I have symbol, description, and I have the to date of this list. I could also add the from date, so I know exactly how much data is associated with this list in the data snapshot. And I would do that by right-clicking, and I can say column chooser, and one of the columns I have is the from, and I can just drag that over here, and now I can see my from date and my to date. Now, so this is from August 2010 to the end of July 2013. So there's 3 years worth of data in here. Personally, I don't include the from date in my list because I like to keep it as compact as possible. So what I normally do is I just drag that up there and remove that column. What happens is when you exit the program, your settings will be remembered. So next time you come back in, you'll have the columns that you have already chosen. Okay, so where does the data actually come from? There are two things to bear in mind here. EdgeRater Pro Unleashed has several data providers, and you can see the data providers if you look in the home area of the menu and you look under data providers. I click on that button, and what comes up here is a list of the possible providers and the configurations for those data providers. And you can see that you can only check one of these as being your default provider, and you see in here that I have Yahoo checked. So that means that Yahoo is my default location where I'm going to get data from. Now you can override that default location in each individual list, but if you don't have any location configured, or the first time you create a brand new symbol list, it will get data from this default location, which in my case is set to Yahoo, but you could set it to any one of these other providers, for instance the Metastock provider, and if you use Metastock, you can check that. You would then have to say the location on your hard drive where your Metastock data is stored. The same thing with the ASCII provider, and with ASCII there's a little bit of more configuration because ASCII data can be configured in various ways with different columns in different orders. So what you would have to do with the ASCII provider is set up your file format here to say what format that ASCII data is in. You also have to say the location for the data. And the other option here is HDSI data. If you have the high growth stock investor software, then you already have a database of stock price data on your hard drive, and if you just check the HDSI box here, it will automatically go to that database to get data. And EdgeRater Pro Unleashed is actually the only official way to access that data in any other program, so it's very unique, and we have a very special relationship with HDSI that allows us to do that. But for this demonstration, I'm going to set mine up to be Yahoo because everybody has access to Yahoo data. It's free, it's online, and there's really no other configuration step other than checking the box to say Yahoo. So I'm going to just make sure that's set, and I'll click OK. I could click Apply here, or I could click OK. Apply. I've had a few questions about this in the past. What does Apply do? What does OK do? But it's pretty similar with any Windows application. The idea is that Apply will apply the settings that you've got that you've set. So if I went and changed the ASCII file settings and I hit Apply, it would apply that, and it wouldn't close this dialog down, so I could then go and make some more settings. As soon as you hit OK, it will close. It will change those settings. It will do the apply, but it will also close the dialog down. So just for information there. All right, so that's the default provider. Now, I said also you could override that default provider in any individual list. So for instance, you could have an S&P 500 list that gets data from Yahoo. You could also have an S&P 500 list set up to get data from Metastock or any of the other locations. So the way that you change a lists provider, and this is a very useful way for updating lists and seeing exactly what data is contained in a list, and I use this all the time, is to hit the edit button. And the edit button will show you all the information associated with that list. So there are 3 tabs within this dialog box. The first one is the list itself, and here you could actually change the list and add new symbols, optionally add a description. Shows you the count down here of symbols that are in that list. And here is the important thing, the data provider. So right now it's set to Yahoo, the same as the default data provider, but I could override that and set it to any of the other options. And if I set it here to ASCII, then what would happen is it would use the settings that I previously configured in the data providers dialog. So whenever I hit the update data button now and I have ASCII set, it will read the settings from the data providers section for ASCII, and it will go out to the file system and try and read that data from the location that has been configured. But as I said before, we're using Yahoo in this case, so I'm just going to stick with Yahoo and keep it as Yahoo. The other important tab in here is the Data Snapshot tab. So I said you've got a symbol list, which is just a text file. You've also got this snapshot which is associated with the symbol list, and this dialog shows you the relationship between those two things. So come into the Data Snapshot tab, and you can always see how much data is being fetched for any one symbol. Okay, so you've got the under Snapshot Data section here, you've got the from date and the to date for the data. You also have very useful information here with these checkboxes, and it will show you if you have data in the list. If there's a symbol contained in the list, it will have a check mark against it. If it's also contained in the snapshot file, you will have a check mark against that too. But it's possible that if you haven't updated the data, or if you've added new symbols but haven't updated the data, that one of these checkboxes, or one or more of these checkboxes, will be unchecked, meaning that what you think you might have as data might not necessarily be what's actually in the snapshot. The snapshot is the definitive source of data that all functions within EdgeRater Pro access. So whenever you do any operation, if you're doing any scanning or backtesting or running any templates against a specific list, it will always go to the snapshot that's associated with that list to get the data. So by coming to this dialog, you can see exactly what data is being used for the operation you're trying to do. And another configuration option for the symbol list is your data update option. So this will tell basically how much data to fetch every time you do a data update. And you can set this to be the most recent number of years, so it will fetch X number of years up until the most recent end of day data that's available. Or you can set a specific date range. If you're doing backtesting for a particular time frame, then you would set this option and choose the time frame that you want down here. Now, another interesting question that I had was, how much data do I need to fetch if I'm going to be doing testing? Say I want to test last year from January through to December of 2012. What would I choose in this box here? Well, I would choose January. So if I was testing from January the 1st, 2012 to December 31st, 2012. First of all, I'd set my to date, because that's the easy one. December 31st, 2012. But the from date, I'm actually going to need more data than just January the 1st, 2012. Because if I have just January the 1st, 2012, and I run a backtest, I'm not actually going to be running over that time period, because a lot of the indicators that are used for various strategies have a lead amount of data that they need before they can start generating signals. For instance, just a simple example here, the 200 period moving average requires 200 bars before it starts giving an output, before that indicator starts to give a value. So there's at least 200 bars worth of data required prior to January the 1st, 2012, if I'm using the 200 period moving average in my testing. Now, it doesn't really matter how much data you get beforehand. You don't really want to go and get a lot of data, because several things are impacted. The more data that you fetch, so say I fetch 10 years worth of data, that's going to take a longer time to get, especially if you're getting it from Yahoo, where it has to download all 10 years of data for every symbol that's in that list. That's number one. Number two, when you download that data, you've then got a snapshot with all of that data in. And so if you're only working on 1 year's worth of that data, then the system, when it runs a strategy, a backtest, or even just generating signals, it's going to have to load all of that data before it can start giving the signals or doing the tests. So it's always best just to get the, pretty much roughly the amount of data you need. So if I said I just wanted an extra year's worth of data here, I'd set this to 2011. Okay, which is set in there now. And then I save this list, just click save, those settings are all saved. And next time I do an update, then it's going to get exactly that amount of data. I'm going to leave this set to most recent years and 3 for now. So the question that would arise then, probably you're thinking, well, if I've got more data than I really needed for my test, how do I restrict the time frame for the test period? And the key to that is in the Entries and Exits tab. If you go to the Entries and Exits tab and look at Date Filter, here's where the date restrictions are for running the backtests. So if you click on the drop down arrow here, you'll get the from and to date. So if I just wanted to do 1 year's worth of testing, then I would set the from date for this test to be 1/1/2012 through to 12/31/2012. So now I'm only going to be testing 1 year's worth of data, the complete year for last year. But if I wanted to do, say, a rolling year up until 7/31, then I could select that's going to be 8/1/2012 to we'll choose, then you'd say 7/31/2013. So then you'd get the last full 12 months worth of data. Now, even though I've set that date in there, it's not actually going to be used right now unless I select the use button. And the use button is a push-in button, so when you select it, it will remain set. It will be highlighted. If you don't see that highlighted, then it won't be used. And the idea behind that is that it's then very easy to just check that off and run unfiltered, and then you can just set it again and run filtered. And the filtered date and time should remain the same, constant between when you uncheck it and check it again. So it's just something to bear in mind about date filtering. And just to show you how that actually works, if I run it now unfiltered, so I don't have the use button selected in here, and say then I want to run a scan cross above the upper Bollinger Band, I can do just double click that. So we use the parameters 20 and 2, and I'll select run here. And as that processes the data, then we end up with the final date here, 7/31/2013. But the first date, if we go back over here, is 8/30/2010. So we're not running filtered. All right, now remember that the date that we have in the snapshot, the actual full amount of data that we have to process is from 8/1/2010. And there wasn't a signal here until 8:30. Well, Bollinger Bands, and we're using 20 periods, so we're going to need at least 20 days before we do get any signals. So that's why the first signal doesn't appear until 8:30. And then the other thing that we can just check is if we select use now, so we're using the date filter, and hit run here. And we see that the final date is still 7/31, but the first date in this list is now 8/1/2012, because this is the actual date that we had set, 8/1/2012. So that completely sets the date of the testing up and allows for any preconditions to any lead time to actually pass before we start generating signals. So it's important to get enough data for the test, and then if you want to be really specific about a date, it's important to come into the entries and exits tab and set the date with the date filter. For now, I'm just going to leave that unchecked, so everything is in its default state. So let's go back over to the security chart tab, and here we can see we have we can scroll through this list. Obviously the chart will update. The very end bar of the chart is 7/31/2013. That's the last date that I have on my chart. Okay, 7/31/2013. Now, when I do an update to get the latest data, I don't have to go in to this edit dialog again. Although personally, I like to go in there whenever I'm doing a data update because I want to see all of the information. I like to be on the data snapshot tab and see how much data I have, and then I like to do the update from within here. But you don't have to. You can just select the list, and then you can just select end of day update. That will go out and get the latest data. Bear in mind that the Yahoo end of day data isn't fully available until around 7:30 Pacific time, so 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. So it's quite late before it's available. So what you can do to work around that is to do an intraday update, or you can also do an intraday update during the market to find out prices that are happening in the market time. So as an example, what I'm going to do here is going to select my NASDAQ 100 list. Now, when I selected that, you see this area is blank. What that means is that I have symbols in here, and I can prove that because I can open up the edit dialog and I can see all of the symbols. I can see that there are actually 99 symbols in this list. Okay, but there's no data. If I look at the data snapshot tab in here, there's no snapshot data. I can see that the symbols are contained within the list, but they're not in the snapshot. And there's no from and to dates in here. So I know that there's no data with this list. And that is obvious to me here because this area is completely blank. So in order to get data, the very first time I would just hit the end of day update button. And this is a new list, and let me just verify that the data provider here is set for Yahoo, which it is. And all I'm going to do is hit the update button, end of day update. Now that's going out to Yahoo, it's fetching the data. You can see that at the bottom is where the progress bar is showing what's happening. As each one of the symbols is downloaded, it's building this snapshot. And it's working through this pretty quickly. There's only 100 symbols, but it's downloading and processing them and creating this snapshot reasonably quickly. But the data that it's going to get, and I'm running this on August the 2nd at 1:45 p.m. PST, so 4:45 EST. The market's already closed, but I'm still only getting the end of day data up to August the 1st because, as I said before, Yahoo data isn't fully available until 7:30 p.m. But what I can do to work around that now is use the Intraday update button, and that's the button right here. Now, as I said before, make sure that you don't have this squished right down because you won't see the Intraday update button. Just open that up enough so that you can see it. I'm going to open it up a bit wider so I can actually see all of the fields without any of the dots. If I hover over any of the fields, I see more information about that field. So this is important when we do the intraday update, which I will do right now. Intraday update, by the way, happens very, very quickly because it's only sending out a couple of requests and it's getting a whole bunch of data back and only a single data point for each stock rather than getting the whole history for 3 years. It's only getting 1 bar's worth of data for each stock. And it's doing that with just 2 or 3 requests to the server. So it's actually happening very, very quickly. And you see what's happened now is that the to date has changed to August the 2nd, so that is today, and the time, 4 p.m., this is Eastern time, the market's closed. So this has actually given me the close price of the day, and when it went to fetch that data, it's gotten the open, high, low, close, and volume for the day. So I can scroll through this list. I know I'm looking at intraday data because the time here doesn't say EOD, meaning end of day. It's actually a time, which is the time, the intraday data time. And if I hover over the to field now, the little tooltip that pops up says 8/2/2013, but it also has a time, 4 p.m. So that is the complete, the tooltip gives you all of the information, the complete date and time that the data is to. What you'll have noticed is, and this somebody asked this question, they did the intraday update, but when they hover over the very last bar of the chart, it still says 8/1. And actually, if I go to any of these stocks, the very last bar is still saying 8/1. And the reason for that is that the date period was already set because you already had 8/1 in there before you did the intraday update, and it didn't bump the chart one to the right. So just remember that. Go and use the scroll bar and push over one to the right, and you'll see the next August the 2nd, which is what we expect to see there. Okay, and we can also, of course, zoom in a bit here, scroll over to the right, and then it's a little bit clearer. Now, intraday data isn't permanently associated with the snapshot. The snapshot only contains your end of day data. The intraday data is something that happens on demand. Whenever you hit the intraday update, it will go and fetch the latest data. And actually, in the case where it's fetching it from Yahoo, it's actually using their 15-minute delayed data. So it's not exactly up to date. It's 15 minutes delayed. But it's not then associated permanently with the snapshot data. What that means is if you then change the list back to the S&P 500, for instance, and we see we have data up to 7/31, end of day data for that, and then change back to the NASDAQ 100, we're back to August the 1st, 2013, end of day. And that's because the data, as soon as you change lists, that intraday update data is thrown away, and you can hit the intraday update button again and get the latest intraday data. And the other thing you can do is, after you've got this, is you don't have to change lists to get intraday data again. You can just keep pressing the intraday update button and it will go out. And if this was during the market, you would see this time increment. Every time I do that, you'd get the latest time in there. So for the more adventurous among you, then let's take a look at the hard drive. You don't really need to know how it's all organized on the hard drive, but for people who are serious about this and like to know where things are stored, then this section will help you to understand that. Bringing up my EdgeRater folder. This is under libraries, documents, my documents. So a couple of people have asked, is it possible to change the location on your C drive of the EdgeRater data? And the answer is that really EdgeRater is always stored under the documents folder. So wherever your documents folder is located, and you can change the location of your documents folder, that's where, underneath there is where the EdgeRater folder will be placed. In the future, it may be possible to specify a completely different location, but right now it's fixed under the My Documents folder. So if you look under there, it's pretty obvious how things are laid out. There's the symbol lists folder, and under symbol lists, you can see the two lists that I have, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100. And these are simple text files. You can open these up in a text editor. I always use TextPad as my favorite text editor. It's very simple, and I've used it for years and years, and I probably should change, but it's, you get to use some of these things and you stick with them. So, but as you can see here, it's simple. It's simple, comma separated. The very first thing before the first comma, the very first field is the symbol name, and then the second field is the company name. It's not required to have the company name, so this essentially you could just make that blank. But each symbol has to be on a new line, and there has to be a comma at the end of the after the symbol. Okay, but let me just put that back to the way it was. Close this down. I won't bother saving. Okay, so simple text files. But then the snapshots, where are they stored? They're under the snapshots folder, and you can probably guess how they're organized in here. Okay, I've got a couple of other folders in here just because I've been saving things off for my own purpose. But in the snapshots folder, the way it's organized is that the data file is a .erd. It stands for EdgeRater data. It's a binary file, and associated with that, there's a .eri file, stands for EdgeRater index, and the text that's before that in the file name is the list name. So S&P 500.txt is the name of the symbol list, and so EdgeRater PRO Unleashed can tell what the associated data file is because it's just done by naming. Okay, and there's data here for the NASDAQ 100, the data file, and the index file. And you can see the size of these files. I've got 3 years worth of data for 500 symbols in this file, and it's about 16 megabytes in size. It's very compact. It's the most compact that it could be, and it's really designed internally for speed of access, and that's actually how a lot to do with how EdgeRater can process the data very, very quickly. And the other thing that you might want to take a look at, just out of interest, is under configuration and symbol lists. There is another file which is exactly the same name of the symbol list, but this time it has XML at the end. It's a text file and it's in something called XML language, but this basically is the configuration for a particular list. So if you look in here, and really there's no point in looking in here, but just so you know, this is how it's stored. And so, under this symbol list, we can see that, for instance here, the data provider has been set to Yahoo. And this is, the dates, it's going to be using the most recent years and the most recent 3 years. That's how the configuration is saved on a per list basis. So if you wanted to make sure everything was reset, so there was no old data lying around. You could clean up your symbol lists directory, delete the lists. You can clean up the snapshots directory, delete all those snapshots, and then go into the configuration symbol lists directory and clean up each of the files there for each of the lists that you want to delete. If you wanted to kind of just be sure that all of the data was clean, there's really no need to do that because the user interface takes care of all that for you. But there are some people who are very into what's existing on the file system, and that's where it is. All right, so we've covered a lot about data here. There's maybe a couple of other areas that you might find interesting. Under the Home tab, there is a symbol lists icon, and if you click on that, that brings up all of the lists that you have in the system. And then you can choose to bulk update the data with end of day data. So if you wanted to update both the NASDAQ in this case and the S&P 500 list, you can select them both and then hit update data, and it will go ahead and something you could do if you had a bunch of lists and you don't want to individually go through and update each one. You can just select them all in here, then say update data, go away, come back, and it should all be completed. And this is also how you could delete lists if you didn't want to delete them via the file system. You go in here, you select the ones you want to delete, and then you can press the delete. You can also delete a list from the panel over here. Make sure you have the list that you want to delete selected. So I'll select the NASDAQ 100, and then I'll press delete. And am I sure I want to delete the list? Sure. Okay. So what's happened is the list has been deleted. It still is showing me the snapshot down here, but as soon as I scroll away from this and I go to the other one, I'm not able to get back to the NASDAQ 100 because essentially that has now been deleted. Okay, so that is everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask about data and symbol lists and how data is stored. And just remember that if you want to enter a new list, it's easy to create using the edit dialog and add individual symbols. But if you've got a lot of symbols to add, that can be quite tedious. So what you can do is prepare the text file yourself using some way of bulk getting that. Sometimes you can download lists from the internet and just put it into the symbol lists folder that I just showed you, and that will be a way to get things in very, very quickly.